special thanks to Rosetta Stone for sponsoring today's video. A few years ago now, I made a video asking whether or not the Gotei 13 of the Hell Arc, so the most recent iteration of this millennia-old organisation, was actually the weakest version to date, made up of collectively the weakest combination of captains and vice-captains we'd ever seen. Of course, that didn't mean the individual Shinigami themselves were weak, no, but it did mean that compared with previous versions of the Gotei 13, this most recent one appeared to not only be missing something significant, but also felt more ramshackle and cobbled together than ever before. Back then, it turned out that it was mostly an agreed-upon consensus among the community, and frankly, why wouldn't it be? The Gotei 13 had been absolutely devastated by the Quincy Blood War, and the new age Gotei 13 that rose from the ashes felt pretty hampered as a result, with captains and vice-captains dead across the board, and their vacancies filled by, with the best will in the world, characters who it felt on first glance didn't necessarily deserve to be there. More than anything, this is a Gotei 13 of unknowns. But there's no denying that so far it is lacking the authoritative presence that comes from wielding real power. It's unproven, and while that's not really its fault, we as readers can't help but think the Gotei 13 has lost a lot along the way in the wake of all the fighting. At least, that's what I thought initially. And to be honest, it may still very much be so, that this end of series Gotei 13 is the weakest of them all, perhaps by a long shot. But I also think there's a reason to believe this may in fact be the strongest Gotei 13 so far, one that has been hardened and strengthened over the course of the 1000-year Blood War arc, and come out the other side featuring many characters who are not only the strongest versions of themselves to date, but by a gigantic margin. So, in today's video, I want to take another look at the Hell Arc Gotei 13, to give it a fairer shake, to see who the power players are, and why they might help to make up the strongest Gotei 13 that we've ever seen. Before we get started on today's video, guys, consider hitting subscribe down below if you haven't done already. Each and every one of you does make a massive difference, so thank you all so very much. And speaking of you making a massive difference, a huge thank you goes out to everyone new who's joined me over on Patreon. Again, your support does mean everything over there. And if you want to support me directly, that's the absolute best place to do it. For as little as $1 a month, it does go a long way. It does help the channel out, and again, I do massively appreciate it. And before we get started on the video as well, first a message from today's sponsor. The start of a new year brings with it new beginnings, and what better time than now to begin learning a new language to help enrich your life in 2026 and beyond. For over 30 years, millions of learners have trusted Rosetta Stone to help guide them on their language learning journey, and now you too can do the same to make sure you achieve that New Year's resolution. Of course, when it comes to making a New Year's resolution, it doesn't have to be as dramatic as learning an entirely new language from scratch. Rosetta Stone is here to help you reconnect with a language you already speak, improve upon the fundamentals, or just discover what you need for the year's big adventure abroad. For me, a New Year's resolution of mine is to learn more Japanese and continue to become more confident with the language. And the key to doing that is to immerse yourself in the language, which is exactly the approach Rosetta Stone takes to learning. Rosetta Stone's totally unique, dynamic immersion method surrounds you in the language you're learning, meaning you hear it, speak it, write it, and more, empowering you to form connections and understand context naturally through doing. What's more, Rosetta Stone's bespoke true accent technology compares your speech to millions of native speakers, and the app's built-in voice recognition tool means you can get accurate feedback immediately.
女の人と彼女の犬。
女の人と彼女犬. So, 2026 is here, and with lessons as short as 5 minutes apiece, Rosetta Stone is the perfect tool to help you with your language learning journey this year. The lifetime subscription is currently a massive 60% off when you visit the exclusive link in the description, giving you unlimited lifetime access to 25 languages at a fraction of the cost. So get started on your New Year's resolution today. So what makes this Gotei 13 tricky to work with is the fact that none of its strongest elements come from its newest additions, unless Iba is hiding a crazy bankai somewhere. It's not like most of these characters are total unknowns either. Iba, Isane, and Lisa, 3 of the 4 new captains in the Hell Arc, are all fairly well-known characters who have been given absolutely nothing to do in the series to date. And again, is that their fault? Well, no, but it doesn't paint an encouraging picture of the newest lineup either, especially when you look at some other latecomers achieved in the Gotei 13s of the past, like Kisuke Urahara, for example. What I'm getting at is that none of the new additions, as of the end of the series, feel like they are going to contribute to the Gotei 13's power in a significant way, which again is what serves to make gauging its ultimate strength difficult. Again, while I don't mean any offense to the likes of Isane, Lisa, or Iba, well, maybe Iba, the truth is more so than ever that they feel like they merely exist to fill a post-war vacancy. That's why the overall opinion on this current Gotei 13 can feel so bleak. But at the same time, there is no telling truthfully how powerful they've become. And honestly, although she doesn't ever get to showcase her strength in a meaningful way, someone like Lisa should already be pretty powerful as it is. But that goes for basically all of the Vizard. Basically, where the new additions are concerned, it is a messy situation that needs some serious cleaning up. But to cut a long story short, no one is really expecting too much from these new captains, as unfair and premature as that may be. But the current lineup of captains as of the Hell Arc in order of divisions is Kyoraku Shunsui, Soifon, Rojiro Otoribashi, Isane Kotetsu, Shinji Hirako, Byakuya Kuchiki, Tetsuzaimon Iba, Lisa Yadomaru, Kensei Muguruma, Toshiro Hitsugaya, Kenpachi Zaraki, Mayuri Kurotsuchi, and Rukia Kuchiki, while the vice captains are Nanao Issei, Genshiro Okikiba, Morechio Omaida, Izuru Kira, Kione Kotetsu, Hinamori Momo, Renji Abarai, Atao Rindo, Yu Yayahara, Shuhei Hisagi, Mashiro Kuna, Rangiku Matsumoto, Ikaku Madarame, Akon, and Sentaro Kotsubaki. That's a lot of names to reel off, and it's definitely a mixed bag of characters to be sure. With the Hell Arc introducing us to Atao and Yu, we now officially know all of these characters in some capacity or another. But like I said, many of them are still either unproven or simply not that exciting. There's not much going on. The Vizard now make up a, I would say, disproportionately large portion of the current Gotei 13, and yet they've been nothing but disappointing throughout basically the entire history of Bleach, for the most part anyway. And really the one Vizard who hasn't been that disappointing, Hachi, hasn't actually returned to the Gotei. So alongside a few new untested captains, we've also got several captains who, while they should be strong on paper, don't have a great track record, and maybe that'll change in the anime's Part 4 when they fight Gerard. That said, looking at the abilities of their Zanpakuto and their skills with the Shinigami combat arts objectively though, characters like Shinji and Rose should be given the benefit of the doubt, and are absolutely a great addition to the lineup, even if they don't quite measure up to their respective predecessors. But either way, where the captains are concerned, that's now roughly half of the full lineup that maybe isn't quite up to the standard of previous iterations, to varying degrees. I realise I might be talking both you and myself out of this idea that this might be the strongest one of them all, so we instead need to look at the stalwart characters of old to really find the power in this Gotei 13, the familiar faces who have been with us since the very beginning of the present day story, and many of whom have changed considerably over the course of just the final arc alone, acquiring such a gulf of power that really they shape the foundation of this entire Gotei 13. And before we get started, that paragraph there really makes me feel bad for Soifon, because she's really the only captain left over from the Soul Society arc who doesn't feel like she's anywhere close to the caliber of power that we're about to discuss, and really deserves, I think, some kind of substantial power up when it comes to whatever the future holds for her. The thing is, while half or so of the captains and vice captains are either maybe average in terms of the overall strength hierarchy, or like I said, completely unproven, the other half is, let's face it, made up of fighters who have not only been treated in the complete opposite way and proven themselves time and time again on the battlefield, but have also undergone such an impossible and transformative leap in power as to likely leave much of the previous Gotei 13s completely in the dust. I mean, these are characters who, by the end of Bleach, are literally doing battle with the immortal archangels of God and are displaying truly incredible feats of strength, the likes of which we've never seen before. The likes of which completely and utterly overshadow almost anything that was shown off in the fights against the Espada. Let's look at several of the vice captains first. This might be one of the strongest lineups of vice captains that we've ever seen. Certainly it feels like one of the most fleshed out, one of the lineups that we understand the best. Now admittedly, missing out on characters like Sasakibe hurts, and there are a few characters in here who, well, they simply haven't done anything in the story, such as Kyone and Sentaro. But with already impressive burgeoning showings from newcomers like Atao, Yu, and even Akon against the Hell Hollows, again, the list is shaping up nicely. And that's without even discussing the absolute biggest hitters among them. The current lineup of vice captains has a number of extremely capable, strong, and versatile warriors, none of whom yet know bankai as far as we're aware, and yet have proven themselves over the course of the story numerous times. We're talking the likes of Matsumoto, Hinomori, and Izuru, reliable fighters with a lot to offer, covering all bases, from broken Zanpakuto abilities like Wabisuke, for example, to incredible prowess in Kido, as the likes of Hinomori has displayed. The same is true of Nanao, who is a Kido master, even going so far as to create her own spells. Meanwhile, Matsumoto feels like an incredible all-rounder vice captain, and in many ways is emblematic of what the most vice captain-y of vice captains should feel like. To me, Ikkaku is a weird character. By all rights, he should be one of the most impressive and high profile of the current day vice captains, and I guess he is, but as far as I'm concerned, he's just never been all that impressive. Just because he loves fighting and is a member of the 11th Division doesn't automatically make him an incredible asset, and he suffered something of a fall from grace with the irreversible destruction of his bankai. And I'm fairly sure he hasn't won a single fight since Edrad, and that cost him everything. Well, I guess there was Shishigiwara as well, but frankly there would have been more pressing questions asked if Ikkaku had lost that fight, and even then Hozakimaru was destroyed. Still, I am a little hard on him. He is a very skilled fighter, and he does have a bankai, which kind of inherently puts him above most of the other vice captains. It's just a shadow of its former self. But where Sasakibe was the original captain-level vice-captain back in the day, and I guess we had the likes of Aizen in Turn Back the Pendulum, in my opinion, we now have two vice-captains who are definitively captain material in this present-day roster, from both a strength but also an attitude and maturity perspective as well, Renji and Hisagi. Plus there's also Mashiro, hanging around as the super vice-captain of the 9th Division, and it kind of feels like cheating to include her. It's unclear even how official her position is, though I'm assuming it is, since she has a badge and everything, but yeah, it just means this lineup has another vice-captain to throw into the mix, and she's a Vizard on top of that too. But Renji and Hisagi, specifically Renji of course, but these two feel like a genuine cut above the rest. Hisagi, as we learn in Can't For Your Own World, has a totally broken Zanpakuto, Kazashini's true ability to rescue Hisagi from fatal injury as a result of the chain of his Shikai representing life as portrayed within the cycle of rebirth, is completely absurd, and Hisagi's newly revealed Bankai Fushino Kojo, well I guess it's not newly revealed anymore, is also crazy too. And even though Kubo likes to dunk on Hisagi all the time lately, the truth is that he does remain one of the new Gotei 13's most capable men. And then there's Renji, who's another story entirely, who was absolutely catapulted to new heights as a result of his training in the royal palace, something that we will see exacerbated even more when it comes to the captains down the road. Renji went from a total, let's not mince words, unmitigated loser in the Arrancar arc, an arc that was so bad for him that it almost decimated his credibility beyond saving, to someone who looked like they were pulling it back in the Lost Agent arc, a character who was really trying to give it their all to rectify the wrongs of the Arrancar arc, to a character who, let's be honest, received a buff so sizable in the final arc that it feels almost inexplicable. And I'm happy for Renji. He's finally kind of getting the treatment it feels like he's always deserved. Renji, with his new true bankai by his side, is now at least mid-tier captain level, though frankly, he's stronger than that. It's difficult to compare Renji to the likes of, say, Rose, as Rose's abilities mean he can't be underestimated. Rose, I would say, is probably very much the mid-tier of captains at the end of the series. He is very much in the middle. He's stronger than all of the new guys. He's stronger than a couple of the existing characters. I would put him personally above Kensei. I would probably put him above Soifon as well, but he's then below kind of everyone else. But frankly, I think he would have defeated Mask if the Sternritter hadn't gone to the lengths he did. But certainly, compared to those more average captains I just rattled off, the likes of Kensei, I think Renji is clearly unconditionally stronger now, and has received an insane leg up. In fact, to renege on what I literally just said about Rose, as we'll see in a moment, if Rukia might be a better barometer. If Rukia is kind of setting the new bar for what an average mid-tier captain can look like, then Renji sits comfortably above her on the hierarchy and sets a new, honestly unattainable for most standard for what a vice captain can actually look like. Would you put Rukia above Rose on a Hell Arc captain ranking? I'm not sure. I mean, I've ranked them before in the past, I just can't remember who I said was stronger out of the two of them. That's a difficult one, but, you know, speaking of Rukia, as we move on to the upper crust of the captains, Rukia is the new captain of the 13th Division, and let's face it, has more than proved herself over the years. While obviously not on the same level as the elder captains of the past Gotei 13s or of the strongest captains of the current Gotei 13, Rukia is, I would say, handily a mid-level captain, and her position as a main character of the series afforded her not only some real growth throughout the story, including that fabled training in the royal palace that kind of got her to this level, but also some real wins against genuinely powerful enemies, including both Espada and Sternritter. So Rukia's an interesting one to me. You know, despite being newly promoted, that's clearly not a bearing on her performance or power whatsoever. And while I'm not saying she's one of the strongest captains around, she is also, I would argue, comfortably one of the most reliable and well-fought of the bunch at this point. Ironically, while Ukitake was, you know, likely much stronger, much more experienced, we've simply seen so much more from Rukia, and we'll get to Ukitake later. But to be honest, with Rukia out of the way, I would say it's now time to move on to the truly big hitters of the current Gotei 13, those who seem to be operating on a completely different level to so much of what's come before. So first up, there's Mayuri, who's another character that hasn't changed all that much over the course of really the story in general, but specifically the Thousand Year Blood War arc. His unique fighting style means that he doesn't really need to undergo specific training in the same way other characters do. But that doesn't mean that this form of Mayuri, this present-day version of the character, isn't evolved in any way. Of course, he now has an altered form of his bankai, Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo Matai Fukuin Shotai, which, after he supplies it with enough data, in the middle of a fight can produce an enormous creature with the capabilities to perfectly counter whatever Mayuri's opponent is fighting with. While it isn't flawless, and certainly isn't the immediate fight winner it might seem to be on paper, there's no doubt this is a straightforward upgrade on Mayuri's original capabilities, which were already considerable. But perhaps even more significant than his changed bankai is Mayuri's changed attitude. As of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Mayuri has had something of a change of heart, though evidence of this transformation was apparent in the Arrancar arc as well. But now, Mayuri works much more clearly for the good of the Serete and the Gotei 13 as an organization, and has taken steps to ingratiate himself further than he ever did before, while he's still a loose cannon and prefers to be allowed to work in his own way on his own. There's no denying he is now more aligned with the Gotei 13 and its values than ever before, turning him into even more of a miniature Kisuke Urahara than we'd ever seen. And that's a good thing for the current Gotei 13. Evidence of Mayuri's true unfettered capability is all over the Quincy Blood War, where he was one of a few people who were absolutely instrumental in the Shinigami's hard-fought victory. And let's face it, nowhere is Mayuri's raw skill and prowess more evident than in his battle with Pernida, where he almost single-handedly took on and defeated not only one of Yhwach Schutzstaffel, but the left arm of the Soul King himself, a piece of God, a deity, one of the closest things to an actual deity in the Bleach universe. Now, would Mayuri have been victorious were it not for Nemu's unwitting sacrifice? We don't know, and her death is another blow to the Gotei 13. But even so, he did hold his own, in a way very few captains could likely manage, and as far as I'm concerned is up there with the best of them. In fact, it kind of feels like Mayuri had to fight an enemy of this caliber after completely and utterly steamrolling a regular Sternritter in Giselle earlier on. But speaking of the best of them, these remaining captains, I mean along with Mayuri, but these remaining captains are the real seat of power in the current day Gotei 13. The gap between them and frankly every other Shinigami currently within the organization seems to be enormous. Byakuya was already one of the strongest, most capable all-rounders in the Gotei 13 before his training in the Royal Palace, to the point where, honestly, that training almost feels like overkill. There were definitely characters who needed it more. Now, he's simply one of the most powerful Shinigami we've ever seen. I think his somewhat lethargic attitude to the second half of the war hurts the perception of his strength somewhat, but there's no doubt about it. Byakuya has emerged from the Thousand Year Blood War arc in the absolute upper echelon, the topmost tier of Shinigami. His Shikai Senbon Zakura is now so huge, dense, and unrelenting that Asnod mistook it for Byakuya's bankai despite having used his bankai in the past, and Senbon Zakura Kageyoshi is now capable of battling it out with Gerard Valkyrie, swarming the Colossus and even obliterating his head. It's hard to truly put into words the difference in scope between this version of Byakuya and the one who challenged Ichigo atop the Sokyoku Hill. But in many ways, it reflects the evolution of the Gotei 13 as a whole, or some of it anyway. Like I said, Byakuya has always been and appeared strong, a role model Shinigami, but now it's on a completely different plane, with him casually defeating 3 Sternritter without taking a hit, and something that I feel is often overlooked, being the first character to outright kill Gerard and inflict the first activation of the miracle upon him. And again, this is all achieved without breaking a sweat, really. Then there's Hitsugaya, who feels a little more uneven than Byakuya. Where Byakuya has always remained a steadfast, consistent paragon of power since even the early days of the story, Hitsugaya feels like, as of the end of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, that he encompasses both higher highs and lower lows than Byakuya, but the potential is absolutely there. While using his regular bankai, Hitsugaya feels maybe only marginally improved over his Arankar arc self, but the truth lies in his power in waiting, his dormant, real strength that he unlocked in the wake of the battle against Aizen after completing his bankai at last. When the ice petals of his bankai all fade away, Hitsugaya's true power is unlocked, and his bankai matures to completion, though currently his body is then also forced to age alongside it to compensate. But this version of Hitsugaya, I mean, is maybe one of the stupidest characters we've ever seen, in a good way, from a power perspective. Although he's only around for a preciously small amount of time, he displays a control over his own abilities the likes of which we've never seen. and displays one of the most broken powers in the series. With his completed bankai, Hitsugaya is now capable of simply freezing things in his vicinity, including the very elements themselves, as we see the frozen trail of air left behind Gerard's shield after the Quincy launches it. And again, Hitsugaya just kind of holds his hand out to accomplish this. And he instantly freezes Gerard's entire body in a single flash, and again doesn't really seem to do anything to initiate this. Like Byakuya, this is a character who fights a titanic vessel of God's heart without breaking a sweat, combating everything Gerard can do with ease. Even when Gerard shatters Hitsugaya's ice and grabs him, merely touching the Shinigami's body causes Gerard's entire form to begin freezing over once more, this time to the point where Byakuya's power can reduce the Quincy's body to dust. But of course, more than anything else, Hitsugaya's new power to cancel out the abilities of anything he freezes is maybe the sneakiest ability in Bleach. It is so overpowered and so ridiculous that again he is catapulted up the power hierarchy to an absurd degree. Gerard's Hoffnung has the ability to inflict injury upon those who chip it in battle in a way that reflects the damage that they've done to the sword, which in itself is a totally busted power without restraint, but Hitsugaya cleanly chops the blade in two, freezing it at the same time, and thereby nullifying its ability, just like that. Had the power of Hoffnung still been active, Hitsugaya would have almost certainly instantly died, or at the very least been cut in two in that moment. Also, he literally cleaves the blade in half with a single swing. Even Kenpachi wasn't getting anywhere near close to that, though I suspect he probably could have done in bankai. And then speak of the devil, there's Kenpachi, who undergoes an incredible journey throughout the Thousand Year Blood War arc. After killing Unohana, he's finally able to hear his Zanpakuto's voice and learns Shikai, before later being granted the power of Bankai by Yachiru. And again, we don't have to go into too much detail here because I kind of feel like I'm just repeating myself at this point, but in Bankai, Kenpachi isn't just duking it out with the Quincy Golem, the undying warrior of God, he's completely trouncing him. Again, Gerard as an enemy is just on a completely different level to almost anything we've ever seen before. That's the kind of scale at which we're working here. Swatting away every single Vizard and knocking them out like it's nothing, as well as taking on the Zero Division before even powering up. But now, in Bankai, Kenpachi is ripping this giant's entire arm off with his bare teeth and a flick of his head, slicing through his unbreakable shield and cleaving him in two, all at a lightning-fast speed that's even quicker than Gerard's own regenerative abilities. Hell, even before using Bankai, Kenpachi's raw physical prowess is now apparently at such an astronomical point that he can catch Gerard's foot when Gerard is enormous and throw him backwards. This is a far cry away from the person who was locking blades with Neutra. Nowadays you just send him flying with a swing of his wrist. And leading them all, of course, is Kyoraku, who, although he hasn't undergone any kind of training, well, that alone shows you the capacity of this character with his potential on display for all to see. Like Mayuri before him, Kyoraku actively takes on a member of Yhwach Schutzstaffel in battle alone, and not just any member, but the leader of the Schutzstaffel and the first Quincy to receive a shrift from the God King himself. In Leal's own words, a man on the outskirts of being a god, one who received special privileges. This is the same guy who defeats Oetsu Nimaya with ease in the anime. Not only does Kyoraku take him on with just his skill as a Shinigami warrior, as a surrogate son of Genryusai, but he defeats the Stern Ritter, forcing him to use Vollständisch, before defeating him again with his Bankai. It's only when those aforementioned special privileges kick into gear that Kyoraku is overwhelmed, which, let's face it, isn't all that fair. There's not a Shinigami around who likely would have defeated that form, hence the need for the Shinken Hakyoken. Unless Hitsugaya can freeze Leal's new form and thereby nullify its power of the X-axis, but why would the freezing wouldn't work because he's completely intangible, nothing can touch him, so you'd need a loophole the likes of which Kyoraku's bankai was capable of creating. Kyoraku may not possess the raw power of Yamamoto and his Ryujin Jaka, but he excels in almost every other area. Katen Kyokotsu is again one of the trickiest and most overpowered Zanpakuto in the series, and the same goes for its bankai too. While Kyoraku himself is a master of every Shinigami combat art, and is clearly capable of fighting toe-to-toe against even Yhwach's holiest, strongest of zealots, his archangels. The Shinigami, who actually managed to fight the Schutzstaffel using just the powers and honed skills of a Shinigami, are clearly being depicted as the very best of the best, and that's true here as well. So I mean, just looking back at that list, it's not hard to see why this might very well be the strongest Gotei 13 of the bunch. We have a string of captains, and even a couple of vice captains, who are capable of battling the strongest villains in the series, and fairly successfully at that. But that's not to say we aren't missing some truly heavy hitters, we are. This Gotei 13 does have to contend with some pretty serious omissions. Of course, Yamamoto is perhaps the biggest of them all, and while his leadership eventually fell apart and his rage clouded his judgment, there is no denying his impossible strength. I've said it before, but it's clear that Yamamoto was depicted by Kubo as being the apex of what was possible for a pure Shinigami soul, and I have no doubt that he too would be able to do battle with the Schutzstaffel in the same manner as these captains I've just listed, and may even perform better in some instances. The same is absolutely true of Aizen as well, though as a pure Shinigami, before his transcendence he wasn't quite on the same level as Yamamoto, but still he is a monstrously strong fighter, and one who, as we saw in the Fate Karakura Town arc, was capable of defeating essentially the entire Gotei 13 with his raw physical strength alone. Urahara is another obvious absentee, though he's a little different to the others. Yamamoto is dead, and Aizen is for the most part imprisoned forever, but Kisuke is not only free and on good terms with the Gotei 13, but he is actively working with them on a closer and deeper level than really ever before, at least since his exile. So while he's not an official part of the Gotei 13, he's certainly not a current captain, it almost feels like he may as well be. I mean, he fights the Schutzstaffel in the same capacity as the captains in Varvelt, on the same side, on the same rung, and manages to kill one outright. He's very much an external member, an external captain, if not on an official capacity. And so whether you would really consider him when trying to weigh up the strength of the current Gotei 13 or not is entirely up to you. But there's no doubt he is ready and waiting in the wings for whenever they need him, even if he isn't actually a part of the organisation anymore. Then, looking at the dead captains once again, the most well-known picks are Unohana and Ukitake, and the absence of both is undoubtedly felt. Unohana not just for being a tremendously skilled fighter, but the greatest healer the Soul Society has ever known, which likely leaves a pretty gaping hole, one that we haven't quite yet seen if Isane is capable of filling. Ukitake is a little weirder, as I mentioned earlier, in that everything we know about his strength can really only be attributed to hearsay. Again, that's why earlier I mentioned it in regards to Rukia. Even though we can be fairly sure that she's probably not currently on Ukitake's level, as far as captains of the 13th Division go, there's no doubt that she's better represented, has a stronger track record, and simply does more to showcase her skills. Almost everything about Ukitake came from someone else. Whether it was Yamamoto praising his ability back in the days of the Academy, to Nanao talking about how much spiritual energy he had. Again, there's no denying that he was clearly one of the strongest captains around, but it does feel a little disingenuous almost when we never really saw what he could do. But still, these are just some of the biggest omissions from the current lineup. It's not perfect, but I do wonder if I, was perhaps too quick to shut it down all those years ago. So that leads me to the ultimate question, the crux of this video. Is this the strongest version of the Gotei 13 after all? Well, I still think the answer is ultimately no. But with the caveat that it might have the potential to be so in the future. The biggest issue facing this version of the Gotei 13 is the unparalleled chasm of power, splitting it right down the middle. The power gap here is completely absurd. From what we know, from what we can take from the manga, those captains that I detailed earlier are, let's face it, some of the strongest beings in the Bleach universe right now. But on the other side of things, we have some characters who barely even feel as though they belong in that white Hayori. The gulf here is astronomical. It is a completely lopsided lineup. How much that really affects the overall strength of the Gotei 13 is unclear, but right now it does kind of feel like much of the fighting force of the Gotei 13 is really being propped up by 5 or 6 extraordinarily powerful warriors. In chapter 314, Aizen outright states that the 13 captains together possess the power of a major fighting force, and that losing half of them, 3 turned traitor and 4 trapped in Waco Mundo, effectively cuts the entire Soul Society's power, not just the captains, but the entire Soul Society's power in half. Would the same be true today? Or would the disappearance of the likes of Iba, Isane, and maybe even Lisa, maybe even Kensei, mean pretty much nothing in the grand scheme of things? Conversely, if a villain managed to trap 4 of those captains that I outlined earlier, Kyoraku, Kenpachi, Hitsugaya, Byakuya, Mayuri, maybe Rukia, well, I think the Soul Society would be in enormous danger, and would potentially lose whatever fight they're up against. You only have to look at the situation that Aizen was outlining to see how different these 2 Gotei 13s actually are. Any permutation of the separated captains would have worked out mostly okay. You know, the 4 captains that are locked in Waco Mundo, Kenpachi, Byakuya, Mayuri, Unohana, they're very powerful, and are frankly going to be able to deal with anything still waiting for them in Waco Mundo. Conversely, if the 4 of them were in the fake Karakura Town arc, and 4 of those captains were in Waco Mundo, again, whatever was happening in Waco Mundo would be an insignificance. Let's face it, Yami, you're not all that. The only real issue would be if Yamamoto ended up in Waco Mundo instead of the fake Karakura Town, but again, you're trading him out for potentially Byakuya, Kenpachi, and Unohana and Mayuri. I'm not saying it's a fair trade, but it's a lot more even across the board. That's what I'm getting at. Yes, Yamamoto is still leagues above basically every captain, but it's a lot more consistent. There's a more consistent through line. And again, the same is true in reverse. You never really felt like the captains in the fake Karakura Town were in that much danger, even up against the top 3 Espada, because Yamamoto was there, because Kyoraku was there, because Ukitake was there. You know, these are 3 of the most powerful captains in the entire series. Yamamoto, as far as we're concerned, could have defeated the 3 Espada on his own. But anyway, certainly the current Gotei 13 feels much more uneven than the Gotei 13 that I just outlined, which was even missing 3 captains already, and way more uneven than the likes of the Gotei 13 of the Soul Society arc, which I still think is perhaps the most consistent of them all. Though the Gotei 13 at the start of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc is also pretty close, if not maybe even more well-balanced on the whole, thanks to characters like Hitsugaya and Soifon improving their skills. A rising tide lifts all boats. But then on the flip side, you've lost the likes of Aizen and Gin, so I don't know. Either way, it is nothing like what they're currently working with. But after much rumination, that is it for today's video, guys. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. In the end, I don't think this is the strongest Gotei 13 that we've ever seen, but considering the collection of absurd power in the top half of this list, and looking at some of the vice captains as well, I definitely think it has the potential to get there one day. Especially if the strongest keep getting stronger, and again, those at the bottom end of this list either prove themselves to be greater than we expect, or improve their strength in some way or another. Regardless, I do think currently it's still a little too uneven to really be considered the absolute best, but as always, I'd love to get your thoughts down in the comments below. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Consider supporting the channel by hitting subscribe down below. I'd love to hit 300,000 by the end of the year, and check out the Patreon as well if you want to support me directly, if you want to support the channel directly. It does make a huge difference, and again, a huge thank you to the new patron supporters from last time. Your support is greatly appreciated, and it does mean the absolute world. And a massive thank you to everyone supporting me over on Patreon in general. Again, I couldn't do this without you. Alright guys, until next time though, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.